On her 21st birthday at Bellevue Estate in Newport, Gabrielle Sinclair just wanted to stand up and escape the crowd's fake pity. But the black girl in the wheelchair lost all hope when Julian Prescott called her a rusted iron statue before 300 guests. A cold silence filled the room because no one dared to stand up to the governor's son. This clash is not just an insult. It starts a journey to expose the rich and show the limits of modern medicine. Amid these heavy class barriers, what hope does the orphan waiter, Isaiah Booker, bring? Can a simple joint adjustment by a waiter change both of their lives forever? The lawn behind Bellevue Estate glowed under strings of white lights. Waiters moved between tables with silver trays. String music floated over the grass. Gabrielle Sinclair sat near the edge of the crowd, close to the exit. She always picked a seat near the exit now. 3 years had passed since the crash on Ocean Drive. 3 years since her legs stopped listening to her. Tonight was her 21st birthday, and her mother had planned every single detail. White roses lined every table, flown in fresh from a farm 2 states away. A 5-tier cake sat on display near the house, still whole and waiting. Diane Sinclair wanted her daughter to feel like a queen. Gabrielle just wanted to feel normal for one night. She wanted one single hour where nobody's eyes drifted down to her chair first. The crash had happened on a rainy Tuesday in October. A delivery truck ran a red light on Ocean Drive at exactly 4:47 in the afternoon. Gabrielle remembered the smell of wet asphalt mixing with burnt rubber. She remembered the sound of glass breaking, sharp and endless, like it would never stop. After that, she remembered waking up in a hospital bed, unable to feel her own toes. The doctors used careful words like spinal shock and possible recovery window. Weeks turned into months, and the window quietly closed. Everyone believed it was closed for good. She had been a varsity sprinter in high school, fast enough to draw college scouts. Now she measured distance in wheel turns instead of strides. She had built walls around that grief, brick by careful brick, over 3 long years. Tonight, those walls felt thinner than usual, worn down by too many candles and too many eyes. She watched the other guests laugh and spin across the dance floor. Girls in bright dresses twirled under the lights. Boys in dark suits held their hands and pulled them close. Gabrielle gripped the wheels of her chair and looked away. She had learned to smile through moments like this. She had learned to make her face say nothing at all. Inside, though, one thing old and tired sat heavy in her chest. She missed dancing more than she missed walking, if that made any sense. Diane had quit her job as a nurse the year after the crash, set on it to care for her daughter herself. She drove Gabrielle to every visit, cooked every meal, and never once grumbled out loud. But Gabrielle noticed the tired lines around her mother's eyes growing deeper each year. Tonight, Diane wanted one perfect memory to outweigh 3 years of hard, quiet grief. Neither of them expected the night to turn painful before it turned beautiful. Her wheelchair was polished chrome, a gift from her father before he passed. The metal caught the party lights and threw them back in small flashes. She kept her hands folded in her lap, still, careful, patient. A waiter refilled her water glass without being asked. She looked up and gave him a small nod of thanks. He had quiet eyes and a calm way of moving through the noise. His name tag read Isaiah. She would not learn his last name until later that night. Across the lawn, Julian Prescott held court near the bar. He was the governor's only son, and he never let anyone forget it. His shoes cost more than most people's monthly rent. His watch flashed gold every time he raised his glass. He laughed loud and often, always making sure people were watching. Julian had grown up believing the world owed him clapping. His father had raised him with one constant lesson, repeated at every dinner table. Standards matter, his father always said. Appearances matter. Weakness should never be allowed near the family name. Julian learned early that cruelty dressed up as honesty could pass for sureness. He mistook silence from others as proof that he was right. Nobody had corrected him in 22 years, so why would tonight be any different? Tonight, he had his eyes on Gabrielle, and not in a kind way. "Watch this," Julian said to his friends, grinning like a boy with a new toy. He crossed the lawn with his drink in hand, hips swaying to the music. The crowd near him parted, sensing trouble before it arrived. Gabrielle saw him coming and felt her stomach drop. She had met boys like Julian before. They always wanted an audience for their cruelty. Gabrielle Sinclair, Julian said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. 21 years old, and still can't dance at your own party. He said it, with a laugh, like it was a joke between old friends. But his eyes were cold, and his smile did not reach them. A few people around him chuckled nervously, unsure what else to do. Gabrielle kept her face still, though her jaw tightened under the skin. Come on, someone ask her to dance, Julian said, turning to the boys around him. He pointed at one, then another, like picking players for a game. Each boy shook his head and stepped back, avoiding her eyes fully. One young man mumbled one thing about his shoes hurting. Another said he needed to find his date. The excuses piled up fast, each one weaker than the last. Julian threw his hands up, feigning shock at their cowardice. Nobody? Not one man here brave enough to dance with her? The band had stopped playing, sensing the shift in the air. 300 guests stood frozen, watching a birthday turn into one thing ugly. Gabrielle stared down at her folded hands, saying no to let tears fall. She had promised herself she would not cry in front of these people. Then Julian leaned down close to her chair, his cologne thick and sharp. Maybe you should just sit there, he said, voice dropping low and mean. Like a statue. A rusted iron statue nobody wants to touch. A gasp rippled through the nearest tables, quiet but sharp. Diane Sinclair, on his feet near the cake table, froze mid-step. Her hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide with horror and rage. Somewhere near the back tables, an old AC unit rattled softly against the porch wall. A waiter's tray clinked once, then went still, as if even the dishes were listening. The band's drummer held his sticks in the air, forgetting to move them. Nobody in that crowd would ever forget the next 5 seconds of silence. Some would tell this story for years, at dinners, at weddings, at funerals. None of them, yet knew how much this one moment would cost the Prescott family. No one moved. No one spoke. The silence pressed down like a heavy blanket. Even the bugs in the garden seemed to hold their breath. Julian straightened up, satisfied, expecting laughter that never came. Instead, guests looked away, ashamed but too afraid to challenge him. His father controlled half the deals in this town. Nobody wanted to lose work over one embarrassing moment. Gabrielle felt the heat rise in her cheeks, shame mixing with fury. She wanted to scream, to throw one thing, to disappear into the ground. Instead, she sat perfectly still, hands trembling a bit in her lap. 3 years of therapy had taught her one thing well. Control your body, when your body refuses to cooperate. That was when a voice cut through the silence, calm and steady. She's not a statue, the voice said. She's a person, and you're a coward. Every head turned. It was the waiter. Isaiah Booker set down his tray on the nearest table, slow and deliberate. He was not tall, not especially strong-looking, dressed in the plain black uniform of the catering staff. But his voice carried across the lawn like a struck bell. Julian blinked, caught off guard by the interruption. Excuse me, Julian said, turning to face him fully now. Do you know who I am? I know exactly who you are, Isaiah said, walking closer. You're the governor's son. And right now, you're also a bully. A few guests near the back let out small, surprised laughs, quickly muffled. Julian's face flushed red, embarrassment sliding fast into anger. You work for the catering company, Julian said, pointing a finger at his chest. One word from me, and you're fired by tomorrow morning. Then fire me, Isaiah said simply. But you're still going to say sorry to her first. Gabrielle looked up, stunned. No one had ever stood between her and Julian's cruelty before. Not classmates, not workers, not even some of her own family friends. This stranger in a waiter's uniform had just risked his entire job for her. She did not know what to feel, so she felt all of it at once. Julian laughed, a short, ugly sound with no real humor in it. Apologize? To the girl in the wheelchair? He said it like the words themselves were silly. What's she going to do about it? Chase me down. The crowd tensed further, sensing the cruelty had somehow gotten worse. Diane Sinclair started forward, but a family friend caught her arm gently. Something in the air told every guest to wait, Just a moment longer. Isaiah did not raise his voice. He never did, not once during the entire exchange. You keep talking about her legs like they define her, he said. But you don't even know why she's in that chair. Do you? Julian shot back, sneering now. Not fully, Isaiah said. But I know enough to see one thing you don't. He walked closer to Gabrielle's chair, slow and careful, hands open at his sides. May I look at your leg? He asked her right at her, voice soft now. Just for 1 second. I won't touch any of it, without your the okay first. Gabrielle paused, looking at her mother, who gave a small, uncertain nod. She turned back to Isaiah and nodded once, her throat too tight to speak. He knelt down beside her chair, careful not to block anyone's view of what came next. His grandfather, Samuel Booker, had worked for 31 years at a veterans hospital in Providence. Isaiah grew up in that hospital's waiting rooms, doing homework between visits. Samuel taught him how joints moved, how muscles pulled bone into place or out of it. He taught him the difference between damage that heals and damage that does not. He showed him old scans, worn charts, and photos of veterans walking again after months of quiet, patient work. Most people give up one day too soon, Samuel often said, closing his notebook gently. Isaiah never forgot that lesson, even years after his grandfather was gone. Isaiah had lost his parents at age 6 in a house fire. Samuel raised him alone until cancer took him 2 years ago. Since then, Isaiah carried his grandfather's old leather notebook everywhere, worn soft at the edges. He remembered the smell of that hospital clearly, even years later. Bleach mixed with old coffee, and underneath it, one thing warmer, like worn leather chairs. He remembered the squeak of wheelchair tires on waxed linoleum floors. He remembered his grandfather's rough, careful hands guiding a soldier's stiff knee back into motion. Samuel never rushed a patient, no matter how long the line in the waiting room grew. Bodies remember being kind, Samuel used to say, tapping the notebook with one thick finger. Fix the joint gently, and the fear leaves with the pain. Isaiah had learned by heart those lessons the way other boys learned by heart baseball statistics. He never expected to use them at a birthday party on a rich family's lawn. He pressed 2 fingers gently against the side of Gabrielle's knee, barely touching the skin. She flinched, not from pain, but from surprise at feeling any of it at all. Wait, she whispered. I felt that. The crowd, still watching, leaned in closer, without meaning to. Julian rolled his eyes, arms crossed tight, over his chest. This is silly, he muttered, but nobody moved to stop what was happening. Your doctor said this was nerve damage, right? Isaiah asked quietly. Permanent, from the crash? That's what Dr. Voss told us, Diane said, walking closer now, voice shaking a bit. He's the best specialist on the East Coast. We paid him a fortune. Isaiah nodded slowly, still watching Gabrielle's leg, with quiet focus. Nerve damage usually feels like nothing at all, he said. No push, no cold, no pain. But she just felt my fingers. Gabrielle's heart pounded hard against her ribs. I thought I imagined it, she whispered. You didn't, Isaiah said. Your hip joint sits a bit out of place. I think it's pushing on one thing it shouldn't be pushing on. Julian scoffed loudly, waving a brushing hand through the air. Oh, so now the waiter is a doctor, he said, turning to his friends for support. A few of them laughed weakly, though most stayed silent, watching closely now. I'm not a doctor, Isaiah said calmly, but I've watched my grandfather fix this exact problem 40 times over. Diane stepped even closer, her voice fast, urgent, and pleading. Can you help her? Please, if there's even a small chance. Mom, Gabrielle said softly. We don't even know this man. I know, Isaiah said, looking right at her now. And I understand if you don't trust me. But I promise you, I'm not trying to hurt you or trick you. A woman near the dance floor, a family friend named Naomi Carter, quietly lifted her phone and started filming. She had watched the whole scene unfold, and one thing told her this moment mattered. Naomi had known Gabrielle since elementary school, long before the crash changed all of it. She remembered Gabrielle running relay races, laughing, fast as any of it on 2 legs. Watching Julian mock her tonight had made Naomi's hands shake with quiet fury. She could not stand up and shout like Isaiah had. but she could make sure the world saw exactly what happened. Nobody noticed the small red light blinking on her screen. Gabrielle studied Isaiah's face for a long moment, searching for the trick, the lie, the angle. She found none, just calm patience and one thing like quiet hope. "Okay," she said finally. "Try it, but go slow." Julian stepped forward fast, blocking Isaiah's path with his body. "This is my party stage, not some circus act," he snapped. "Get back to serving drinks, before I call a guard." "It's not your party," Diane said sharply, finding her voice at last. "It's my daughter's birthday, and you've humiliated her enough for one night." Julian opened his mouth to argue, then caught the look on Diane's face and stopped. Even he understood there were lines even his father's money could not erase. Julian's a guard friend, a broad man named Marcus, stepped forward, clearly ready to intervene. "Sir, should I call a guard?" he asked Julian quietly. Julian paused, looking at the sea of raised phones around him. Stopping this now, in front of so many cameras, would look even worse. "Let him try," Julian said finally, waving a stiff hand. "Let's watch him fail in front of every guest." Isaiah knelt again beside Gabrielle's chair, breath slow and even. "This might feel strange," he said. "Tell me the second any of it hurts, and I stop fully." She nodded, gripping the arms of her wheelchair tightly. The whole lawn had gone silent again, 300 pairs of eyes locked on one small, careful movement. Somewhere near the tables, a glass clinked softly against a plate. The AC unit inside the house hummed faintly through an open window. Even the bugs seemed to pause, waiting with every guest else. A young boy near the dessert table froze mid-bite, fork halfway to his mouth. His mother gripped his shoulder, without looking away, from Gabrielle's chair. Julian's own friends stood like statues now, drinks lost in their hands. Nobody dared to whisper, as if noise itself might break one thing fragile in the air. Isaiah placed one hand under her knee and the other along her hip. He moved slowly, feeling for the exact spot his grandfather had shown him years ago. "Breathe out for me," he said gently. Gabrielle exhaled, and he shifted his hand, with quiet, practiced push. A soft click sounded, barely audible, like a knuckle popping back into place. Gabrielle gasped, her whole body going rigid for a single second. "Oh my God," she whispered, eyes filling with sudden tears. "I felt that. I really felt that. What does it feel like?" Isaiah asked, still holding her legs steady. "Warm," she said, voice shaking. "Like pins and needles, but warm. I haven't felt warm there in 3 years." Diane pressed both hands over her mouth, tears running freely down her face now. Naomi's phone kept filming, capturing every second of the quiet miracle unfolding. Julian stood frozen, his earlier sureness draining fast from his face. "Try moving your toes," Isaiah said softly, sitting back on his heels. Gabrielle looked down at her foot, concentrating hard, willing one thing to happen. Her big toe twitched, just a bit, but it moved on its own. A sound between a laugh and a sob broke out of her chest. "It moved," she said. "Mom, it moved." The crowd erupted, first in murmurs, then in full gasps and scattered clapping. People who had stayed silent during Julian's cruelty now leaned forward, phones raised, tears in their eyes. An older woman near the back, a retired nurse herself, called out, "Praise God, look at that." A young boy near the dessert table clapped his small hands, not fully under on his feet, while every guest cried. Even guests who barely knew Gabrielle found themselves wiping their eyes without warning. Diane dropped to her knees beside her daughter's chair, sobbing openly now. Julian's friends slowly backed away from him, sensing the shift in the crowd's attention. Nobody looked at him anymore. Every eye in the garden had turned toward Isaiah and Gabrielle instead. "This doesn't prove any of it," Julian said, his voice cracking a bit despite his effort to sound tough. "One toe moving means nothing. It means her nerves aren't dead," Isaiah said, on his feet up slowly. "It means somebody missed one thing important 3 years ago. Dr. Lawrence Voss, the family's costly specialist, was not present that night, but his name now hung heavy in the air." Diane pulled out her phone, with shaking hands, already dialing his emergency line. She had trusted him fully for 3 long years. Tonight, That trust had cracked wide open in front of 300 witnesses. The following weeks moved fast, faster than Gabrielle had expected any of it to move again. Dr. Voss agreed to see her. Within 2 days, his voice tight and defensive on the phone. When he examined her, he found what Isaiah had already found for free. Her L4 vertebra had shifted a bit after the crash, pinching a nerve root. It was treatable with proper alignment and months of careful physical therapy. It was never the total nerve death he had said was true 3 years earlier. How did you miss this? Diane demanded, her voice sharp, with 3 years of buried anger. Dr. Voss stammered through an explanation about complex cases and difficult imaging. He talked about the chaos in the ER, that first night, the tired staff, the rushed scans. He said one thing about money limits and how they had restricted a second, more detailed scan. His hands moved fast, through the air, the same hands that once seemed so confident and sure. Diane watched him closely, remembering every visit where he had waved away her questions. Gabrielle stayed quiet, studying the man who had once decided her entire future. 3 years of physical therapy sessions, canceled early because there was nothing left to save. 3 years of a wheelchair ramp built into their home without a second opinion. Nobody in the room believed a single word he said. Naomi's video, posted that same night, had already reached 2 million views. Local news picked up the story within 48 hours of the party. A headline read, "Governor's son mocks disabled woman. Waiter proves doctors wrong." Morning shows across the country picked up the clip within days. Disability supporters praised Isaiah for treating Gabrielle with dignity instead of pity. Medical workers debated the story online, some cautious, others quietly impressed. A few doctors publicly said that rush diagnoses happened more often than patients realized. Physical therapy schools reported a small but clear rise in new sign-ups that same month. Somewhere in that noise, a quiet college dropout became a surprising sign of hope. Julian's father, Governor Richard Prescott, called an emergency press conference within the week. He stood at a podium, jaw tight, reading from a prepared statement written by his staff. "My son's words were inexcusable," he said, voice flat and practiced. He will be taking a leave of absence from all public events. Behind the scenes, the fallout hit harder than any public statement could show. Prescott Development, the family's construction company, lost 3 major city deals within a month. Business partners who once laughed at Julian's jokes fast stopped returning his calls. His college fraternity quietly asked him to step down from his leadership role. The golden watch, the costly shoes, none of it mattered anymore. People had seen who he really was, and they remembered. Reporters dug deeper, and old stories about Julian resurfaced from years before. A former classmate told about how he had mocked a stuttering student in 10th grade. A former employee at his father's company told about being fired after saying no to laugh at one of Julian's jokes. None of these stories had mattered before the video. Now, each one added another brick to a wall Julian could not tear down. His mother stopped attending charity events, tired of the whispered questions. His younger sister was pulled from her private school after other students began repeating the video's cruelest line at her. Julian tried calling Gabrielle twice, leaving voicemails full of stiff, lawyer-approved apologies. She never called back. Some wounds needed more than a practiced sentence to heal. Isaiah, meanwhile, found his life turned upside down in ways he never expected. The catering company fired him the morning after the party, just as Julian had threatened. But within days, 3 different physical therapy clinics reached out, offering him interviews. His grandfather's old notebook, filled with careful diagrams and notes, fast became evidence of real knowledge. A local community college offered him a full scholarship to study physical therapy the right way. "I never ended high school," Isaiah said to the admissions advisor, voice quiet with old shame. He had dropped out at 17 to work full-time after his grandfather's diagnosis. Money for cancer treatment mattered more than finishing classes back then. "We'll help you get your equivalency first," the advisor said kindly. "Then we'll get you into our program the right way." Isaiah studied late, into the night for months, math workbooks stacked beside his bed. He failed the practice test twice, before finally passing on his 3rd attempt. He called nobody to celebrate, since he had nobody left to call. Instead, he opened his grandfather's notebook and wrote one line on the last blank page. "Passed today. Wish you could have seen it." Gabrielle insisted on paying for his textbooks, though he refused at first out of pride. "You gave me back feeling in my leg," she told him firmly. "Let me give you books in return." Their friendship grew slowly, built on long conversations during her physical therapy sessions. Isaiah came along twice a week, not as her therapist, but as her friend. He held her hand during the painful stretching exercises, when the pain made her cry. She listened to him talk about his grandfather, about the hospital hallways he grew up in. Neither one rushed any of it, content to let one thing real take its own time. Some sessions were harder than others. One afternoon, Gabrielle's hip locked up mid-stretch, and pain shot down her leg like fire. She yelled and gripped the therapy table, tears running down her face without warning. Isaiah knelt beside her instantly, voice low and steady, the same voice from the party. "Breathe with me," he said. "In for 4 seconds. Out for 4 seconds." She matched his breath until the spasm slowly eased its grip. Afterward, she say sorry for crying in front of him, embarrassed by her own tears. "Don't ever say sorry for that," he told her firmly. "My grandfather used to say pain is just the body relearning trust." On the days she felt like giving up, he reminded her how far she had already come. On the days he doubted whether he fit in a classroom again, she reminded him of that leather notebook. They pushed each other forward the way only two stubborn, patient people can. 3 months after the party, Gabrielle stood for the first time using parallel bars. Her legs shook violently, weak from years of disuse, but they held her weight. Diane cried in the corner of the therapy room, filming every second on her phone. Gabrielle looked across the room and found Isaiah's eyes immediately. "Watch me," she said, voice fierce with determination. "I'm watching," he said, smiling wider than she had ever seen him smile before. 6 months after the party, Gabrielle took her first on her own steps across her living room. It took 11 careful steps, each one slow, wobbling, and fully her own. Her mother yelled, with joy loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Gabrielle laughed and cried at the same time, collapsing into the couch. After that, exhausted and thrilled, news outlets asked for interviews, wanting to capture the miracle getting better for their morning shows. Gabrielle agreed to only one interview, insisting Isaiah sit beside her during it. "This isn't a miracle," she told the reporter firmly. "This is what happens when someone really pays attention." The reporter asked about Julian Prescott, about forgiveness, about moving forward. Gabrielle considered the question carefully before answering with quiet honesty. "I'm not angry anymore," she said. "But I haven't lost what he said either. Both things can be true." Julian eventually left the state, taking a quiet job at a cousin's company in Texas. He worked in a small warehouse office, far from any spotlight or clapping. Co-workers there knew nothing about his father or his old life in Newport. For the first time in his life, nobody laughed at his jokes just because he was rich. He often thought about that night on the lawn, replaying it against his will. He never contacted Gabrielle again, though he kept her name saved in his phone. His father's political career survived, barely, after a long and painful campaign season. The scandal followed the family name for years. After that, whispered about at every event. Some lessons, it turned out, cost far more than any apology could repay. 1 year after that birthday party, Bellevue Estate hosted another celebration. This time, Gabrielle walked onto the lawn using only a simple cane for balance. The band began playing the same song that had been playing the night all of it changed. She looked across the crowd and found Isaiah waiting near the dance floor, hand already extended. "Would you like to dance?" he asked, echoing the question nobody had dared ask a year before. "I thought you'd never ask," Gabrielle said, smiling as she took his hand. They moved slowly across the floor, her steps careful, but steady, his hands gentle and sure. The crowd watched, but this time nobody whispered cruel words or looked away in shame. Some guests wiped their eyes, remembering exactly where they had stood 1 year earlier. A few of the same young men, who had refused to dance, with her now stood watching, quietly ashamed. Diane wept happy tears near the cake table, watching her daughter dance for the very first time in 4 years. Naomi filmed this moment too, though she never posted it anywhere public. Some moments fit in only to the people living inside them. Later that year, Isaiah ended his 2-year degree in physical therapy with honors. He took a position at the very Veterans Hospital, where his grandfather had worked for 31 years. He kept the old leather notebook in his desk drawer, worn pages carefully kept safe under glass. Every new patient he treated, he thought of Samuel Booker's patient hands and quiet wisdom. Gabrielle ended her own degree in social work 2 years later, set on it to help others like herself. She started a small foundation, funding second medical opinions for patients who could not afford them. She named it simply, the Second Look Foundation, after the moment someone finally looked closer. Within its first year, the foundation paid for 41 second opinions across 3 states. 6 of those patients received fully new diagnoses, changing the entire course of their treatment. One was a young boy in Ohio, told for years his limp would never improve. Another was a retired teacher in Georgia, misdiagnosed after a simple fall down her front steps. Each story reminded Gabrielle exactly why the foundation mattered so deeply to her. Gabrielle kept a small board near her office door, one photo for each family helped. She added a new photo every few months, a quiet, growing wall of second chances. Isaiah's workers at the Veterans Hospital often asked about the framed photo on his desk. It showed an old man, with rough hands, on his feet beside a much younger Isaiah. "That's my grandfather," he would say. "He taught me all of it, that really matters." Younger therapists sometimes asked him for advice when a case seemed hopeless. He always gave them the same answer, passed down like a family heirloom. "Look closer," he would say. Most people stop looking 1 minute too soon. People often asked her what she remembered most from that painful night at Bellevue Estate. She never said Julian's cruel words or the crowd's frightened silence first. Instead, she talked about a waiter setting down his tray, choosing to speak up anyway. "Kindness doesn't need the okay," she liked to say. "It just needs someone brave enough to offer it first." Somewhere in a drawer in a small apartment in Providence, an old leather notebook still sits, its pages soft with age and use. It holds diagrams of joints and muscles, careful notes written by a patient, loving hand. It also holds, tucked inside its back cover, a photo of 2 people dancing. One stands with a simple wooden cane, steady and proud. The other holds her close, smiling like a man who found one thing worth keeping. Sometimes the smallest act of attention changes all of it that follows. Sometimes a single voice, saying no to stay silent, rewrites an entire story. Gabrielle Sinclair learned to walk again, one careful step at a time. But what she really learned was one thing simpler and far more lasting. Real strength never needed loud words or costly watches to prove itself. It only needed one honest hand, offered freely, asking nothing back in return. Every year, on the anniversary of that birthday party, Gabrielle and Isaiah returned to Bellevue Estate. They did not throw a party or invite 300 guests anymore. They simply walked the lawn together, quiet, unhurried, grateful for ordinary things. Gabrielle liked to say that the hardest steps were never the biggest ones. They were the small, shaky first steps nobody else saw or clapped for. Isaiah always answered the same way, holding her hand a little tighter. "I saw them," he would say. "I'll always remember watching you take them." And in one spot, in a drawer full of old birthday cards and lost photos, Diane kept one single item from that painful night. It was a small, folded napkin from the party, stained faintly with cake frosting. On it, written in Isaiah's careful handwriting, were 5 simple words he had given Gabrielle that evening. "You are not a statue." She never framed it or hung it on a wall for guests to see. She kept it instead in her nightstand drawer, close enough to touch whenever doubt crept back in.